Welcome back everybody to part 2 of the Cigar Swindler story time. If you are new here and you haven't caught part 1, I highly suggest you go back and watch that video. I will link it below because it's very important context to the rest of the story that we're about to tell you and the revelations that we learnt about Oscar, the mysterious cigar swindler himself. So obviously from the last point we left off, we had just learnt via text, I think, from Danny that he had actually swindled off of him personally thousands of pounds. Given that we were all in the trenches together, I had to know the tea. I'm personally somebody who likes to watch documentaries, especially like murder documentaries. It's the why that I wanted to know, the origin story of this man. So we go to the Beaumont and we get to know Danny a little bit more. I think when he sat us down, he just said, everything that you think you know about Oscar is a lie. We had learned prior that he was a successful owner of a business that got bought out by Goldman Sachs. And he was doing this big podcast that had all of these big highfalutin guests on, celebrities. He had this very wealthy girlfriend that he had met from Oxford. He mentioned that he had traveled to Cuba, or he was going to all these other like regions of Latin America to go on like cigar tours and things like that. Turns out none of it was true. Shall we start with his hedge fund, supposed hedge fund? He named some friends, I think, from his university. But something that we had also learned is he never went to Oxford University. And then look, I'm not here trying to say that you can't make big money moves without a social footprint, but for somebody who talks it up a lot and has a public facing podcast, you would think that you would shout about various things, right? Or you'd want your name to be known. But this man had literally no social media. So we actually learned that not only did he not go to Oxford University, which look, there's no shame in that. You don't need to say that kind of stuff. It's not that important if you're successful, right? But apparently he also actually doesn't live in London. Like his parents aren't actually from London, which obviously if you're old money, you like to pretend, some people anyway, may want to pretend that they're from Mayfair or whatnot. And he claimed that he lived in central London, but actually he was living with his girlfriend. She had a flat that either she was renting or because she actually came from wealth, we learned this from Danny, that he moved in with her. And actually what we had learned was that their meeting was all but serendipitous. The conversation naturally, when we were back in like Claridge's, was, you know, how did you meet your significant other? And I believe he mentioned that he just bumped into her at a coffee shop or something like that. But we had actually learned from Danny in this meeting that he had already pre-scouted her. She was marked. So this man did if anyone's watched Netflix's You, he did a You. He had already seen that she's actually from, I think, Oxford. She actually comes from old money. I believe he even apparently knew that she had just maybe broken up with a ex-boyfriend or something, so she was emotionally quite vulnerable. But I think she also had some family issues or mental issues that she was working through. There's no shame in that at all, which is not what I'm saying, but I suppose just to paint you a bit of a picture of that, this was a vulnerable girl. So they met supposedly in a coffee shop or something like that, and he came up to her. It was kind of organic, but we later found out because these guys got quite close. They met each other every other day. He just basically infiltrated every single part, and he just didn't care who he told. And he is quite a charming man, so I'm not surprised if she, you know, thought, wow, this guy's so authentic and swept me off my feet. But then shortly thereafter that, he said that he was, he had a house in London, but she was never allowed to visit or something. And that when they were moving in together, I think he got her to rent a hotel or like a members club, and they rented it for many months. And he was like, oh, don't worry, I'll pay you back, I'm good for it, my family's old money, it's just a cash flow issue at the moment, I'm actually sorting out the rent for the new place, but the new place fell through or it had a leak or all of these things, and she just bought into it. And obviously he told her he would buy her a dog, and the dog, sadly, surprise surprise, also did not exist. I think he ended up causing a bit of a rift in her family as well, where he was basically isolating her from the family, which is just typical narcissistic or just, you know, scumbag behavior, really, right? I think he even told Danny that he didn't even love her. He was doing it so that they could get married and not sign a prenup, which I thought was absolutely disgusting and incredibly savage, especially to a girl that had no idea that he was also interested in sleeping around with other individuals. But that is besides the point. We're here to discuss the cigar stuff that he was also swindling. Let's talk about the escapades as it pertains to the thousands of pounds. So apparently what he was doing was he was using the podcast, which was a real podcast, by the way, don't get me wrong, it was just a front. You know, setting up a nail salon or a laundromat, and yeah, it's turning over 6 figures, right? And he did authentically get on guests like Eddie and guests like Kirby in good faith. They genuinely believed those were real podcasts, and they just wanted to share the pure enjoyment and the hobby of smoking cigars. Now we all know we need to do our own due diligence when it comes to things, right? But there was obviously no big names. Those were all lies. I think Danny said he knew they were lies, but he was just kind of just sitting there just to see what he would come up with next. I think he basically implies that Oscar didn't have anything to do, or even maybe a home. I think he claimed that he was always out working to his girlfriend, who was obviously paying for their flat, but he didn't want to be in the home all the time because otherwise she would ask, why is he here? So he would always be out smoking cigars with Danny, who was a business owner himself, but obviously had the freedom to dictate his own schedule. And I think he would basically use those smoking sessions to befriend other cigar smokers who were in the same lounges as him. So obviously Eddie loves the Bulgari Hotel for smoking, Beaumont, all of these. So what he would do is, essentially what he did to us is just naturally strike up a conversation with people who are smoking, maybe borrow a lighter, or maybe just talk about someone's outfit or whatever it is, get their contacts, maybe give them a cigar or whatnot. But actually those cigars or whatever gestures he was doing was all goodwill from other friends or general manager. If you remember from the last episode where I mentioned that we got given some cigars from a more boutique New World brand, and the owner was someone that he was friends with. He would always go to hers and she would allow him to get all the new releases and whatnot, and he would say, I'll promise to review them on my show. She would never get any return back, but then what he would do is not only gift them out to others as goodwill favors, but he would also apparently sell them on. Danny mentioned maybe he gave him some cigars, or some other mutual friend gave him some cigars, and later on he tried to sell them to another person in a cigar lounge. So he's literally buying and selling like stock, even though they are gifts or goodwill gestures. There was always an excuse, right? There was a cash flow issue, despite the fact that he's semi-retired or retired. And then I think he also tried to scam one of our mutual friends thereafter of a watch, if I'm not mistaken. So I think he's maybe planned so many events with lots of disparate circles, but then at one point in time, Danny put 2 and 2 together and then realised all these other people were individually scammed. So that was like a lot of information that was said when we were at the Beaumont. And then I think after that, we did a bigger group gathering and we actually met that mutual friend who had the watch incident, and he told us about his experience, and everyone just found him to be a very shady character, always trying to host these events, and everyone found it very weird that also we found out, obviously he doesn't have social media, but apparently he had a burner account. So what we all didn't know was that he was all watching us. Given the fact that when it came to his own relationship, he had already marked his target with a lot of research, and even down to the place where she was going to be at a specific time, no doubt stalking her. I would not put him past him to do the same for us. And that is, I think, the craziest part of all this, is that while our meeting was totally chance, it's the fact that you know you're being worked on after the fact. He was always out and about hiring cars, apparently. Apparently none of his cars were real cars, because every time he'd pick Danny up for the day's activities, he would be in a new car and he'd always say, oh, and this one's in the shop, or something like that. And it would always be a new excuse. He would never invite Danny to his house. And I think he met his girlfriend once, but kept interactions very minimal. Now we know it's because he wants to isolate her. And I think after the incident, they had also a very bad fracturing of the relationship. So I think Oscar was blocked by Danny, then Danny spread the word. So now the jig was up, as it were, for Oscar's grift. And actually, I think he even got kicked out of one of the cigar lounge. I think it was like a members club which had locker rooms. I think he's also gotten blacklisted now from a few restaurants and bars and things. And actually, come to think of it, one of the big details that I forgot to mention, because it's all the jumble and going into my long-term memory now, is that I don't even think his name was Oscar. I think what Danny said was that he's possibly unsure that his full name that he understood was real, because he couldn't find any traces of even the real facts that he mentioned. And he tried to desperately warn his girlfriend about all these facts. In fact, he even talked to a mutual friend that he was once introduced to a while ago to talk some sense into her, but it wasn't working. And she actually was told, in a similar fashion to Tinder Swindler, that they were all his enemies. They were all jealous of her. She genuinely thought this, and everyone was trying to put two and two together for her. Like, has he ever produced the rental property that he was going to have, or I think he was going to buy perhaps? Has he ever showed you where he works? Have you ever met his family? I don't think she's ever met his family. I think there was even an issue with his passport, if I'm not mistaken, that he couldn't even leave the country to travel, because I think they wanted to travel abroad and he would always have a reason why they couldn't, despite telling us, of course, that he was very well travelled. And it was crazy that although we had a little bit of a scam incident, which honestly would not have made a suite of episodes, shall we say, on YouTube, what we found out thereafter about how he scammed Danny for thousands, which would never materialize. He never got it back. He confronted it. He kind of gaslit him, to be honest. And then after that particular incident with our event, he realized, yeah, this needs to stop. So then he cut off contact. We actually came away from that thinking that we had dodged a bullet, even though we had gone through it, we got our money back, but others didn't. Still today, people are out of pocket, least of all his poor girlfriend, which I'm hoping at this time that we will have good news in that she will have realised who he is. You need to be careful who you surround yourself with, and I really hope to this day that she's done what's right for her and actually listened to her friends and loved ones and spared herself what would maybe be a life of misery. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed or found this story interesting. Where is he today? We have no idea. We obviously broke off contact. He has no social media that we are aware of. And who knows, maybe he's watching this video right now as you guys are seeing it. I don't think he will be in the cigar community. It's far too small at the moment in London. Let me know if you've encountered a cigar swindler or the cigar swindler himself. What's the moral of the story? I think the first is that looks can be deceiving, like massively. Honestly, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Be careful who you keep in your circle, you know? Be FBI when it comes to what people are saying. Nothing is worth it for clout or for anything like that. Not that we did that, but obviously I know certain individuals around him will have had the wool pulled over their eyes because they thought this guy was the real deal. But it's just not worth putting yourself into harm's way for that. And I've actually learned as a result of this that even though we were looking for people in the community, sometimes it's best just to have peace. If people show you who they truly are, believe them. I will leave it there as we've been talking a while. Thank you as always for watching, and I will catch you in my next one.